In 2002, Tania Simpson started a relationship with a man named Paul Rogers. They had met while working together at the Lone Star Tavern on the Gold Coast and moved in together in 2004. In April 2006, their daughter Kyla was born. In 2007, the family moved to the northern New South Wales town of Inverell to manage a caravan park that Tania's parents had purchased. Simpson would later admit that she felt like a single mother during this period, as Rogers would take little part in the management of the park, as well as caring for Kyla. In early 2009, the couple travelled to the Gold Coast, so Tania could have a scan relating to her pregnancy with their second child. Paul Rogers was absent at the scan, and it was later revealed that he used the trip to meet up with a former girlfriend. According to multiple sources, Rogers was controlling of Tania, even early on in the relationship. He was very demanding and would discourage Tania from spending time with friends. Tania had long suspected that her boyfriend was being unfaithful to her, something that he would continuously deny. When Tania discovered that Rogers was using dating websites, she confronted him about it, and his response was that he was doing it as a joke and to prove that he wasn't gay. In July 2009, the couple's son Bronson was born. In June 2010, the couple announced that they were getting married, but just a few months later, Tania called the wedding off and moved back to the Gold Coast with her children. The separation seemed to be a relief for everyone except Paul Rogers. Tania's father had travelled to Inverell to manage the caravan park when he received a phone call from his daughter. She was upset and told her father that she had received a text message from Rogers that suggested he was going to commit suicide. Later that night, Rogers returned to the park. When Tania's father asked about the text message, Rogers' only response was to ask, was she crying? A few days later, Tania Simpson returned to Inverell to collect some belongings. In the early hours of the morning, Rogers attempted to break into the home. He was eventually allowed in. He wasn't wearing a shirt, so that Tania would notice cuts across his chest that he would mention were the result of self-harm. As part of a property settlement, Tania's father gave Rogers money that he would use to purchase a vehicle and then follow Tania to the Gold Coast. Upon his arrival, he requested to spend time with the children. At first he wanted to see them every day, and when he was refused this request, he would hold a razor blade to his chest. It was finally agreed that he would spend time with Kyla and Bronson for several hours every Saturday. Over the next months, Paul Rogers would regularly follow Tania in his car to check on her movements and who she was seeing. He would get a tattoo on his torso that read, "My loves, Tania, Kyla, Bronson." He would repeatedly call and text Tania, begging to resume the relationship. He would sit in his car for long periods near Tania's apartment with the purpose of joining her and the children when they went for a walk. During the summer school holidays of 2011, Rogers went to his daughter's school and carved his and Kyla's initials surrounded by a love heart on a tree in the playground. He would also begin following Antony, a fellow New Zealander who he had met years prior on a building site. Way had remained friendly with Rogers and Simpson over the years, but now Rogers had suspected that his ex-fiancée had been spending time with Way since the separation. In February 2011, it was decided that the situation had deteriorated to the point that police had to be contacted. Tania told Sergeant Robert Smithson that she was concerned about Paul Rogers' mental state and was worried about him continuing to hang around. Smithson called Rogers, who explained that he just wanted to see his children and that it was not his intention to cause grief to Tania or her family. To Smithson, Rogers seemed normal and reasonable. Rogers thanked the officer for listening to his version of events, and the call ended. In the following weeks, Paul Rogers' behaviour seemed to improve. He obtained employment, and his text messaging and stalking type behaviour diminished. However, by April, Rogers returned to conduct surveillance on Tania as well as Antony Way. He was convinced that the two were having a relationship, despite Way's denials. Rogers purchased a set of binoculars and began renting different vehicles so that Tania, her family and Way would not recognize him in another car if he was following them. Tania purchased a unit and the management rights to a complex at Rabina. She moved in on May 3, 2011. She told friends and family that she was comforted by the security offered to her at the complex. 8 days later, Tania reported to police that a glass entry door to the unit complex had been smashed open, allowing access to an underground garage. The remote security garage electronic box was opened, and some of the internal wiring was ripped out, rendering it inoperable. No fingerprints were found, and no person was found responsible. However, it was likely Paul Rogers. On May 12, 2011, Rogers called his former girlfriend, who was out of town, to proudly announce that he had finally proven that Tania was seeing Antony Way. He explained that he had seen Way come and go from Tania's unit. However, he never said what he intended to do now that he had the proof. On May 15, 2011, Paul Rogers left his former girlfriend's home after packing a hose he had removed from the washing machine, towels, gaffer tape, and a knife. He drove to Tania's and waited there until Antony Way's car entered the complex at 9:30 p.m. After waiting for another car to enter or exit for secure car park, he was able to enter the car park. Now he was able to make his way freely to the front door of Tania's apartment. The following morning, Tania's father arrived at the apartment to help with the cleaning of the complex. He buzzed the apartment and attempted to call Tania multiple times with no answer. Using his key, he opened the front door and discovered the body of Antony Way in the hallway. Shaken, he quickly left the apartment and notified police of the death, as well as informing them that his daughter and granddaughter were missing. Police entered the apartment and discovered the body of Tania Simpson, while 5-year-old Kyla was nowhere to be found. Investigators were able to piece together what may have happened the night before. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, meaning Paul Rogers was either allowed in or the door had been left unlocked after Antony Way entered a short time earlier. Way was attacked first, and without warning. There were no significant defensive injuries sustained. The 33-year-old was stabbed 5 times, all to the right torso, with 2 of the wounds being fatal. It was likely Tania was standing nearby when the attack began and ran from the hallway to the kitchen in an attempt to grab a mobile phone and car keys. The phone was attached to a charger, and forensic analysis of the power socket showed that considerable force was used to remove it from the wall. Tania was attacked from behind. Rogers had attempted to cut her throat, but the 2 wounds observed weren't considered fatal. As she attempted to escape, blood from these wounds had spurted along the kitchen bench. Paul Rogers proceeded to stab his ex-fiancée multiple times, including the cuts to the throat and a number of defensive wounds. Tania Simpson was reported to have 31 injuries inflicted by a bladed weapon. After the murders, Paul Rogers entered his daughter's bedroom. He pulled the doona back, leaving behind bloodstains. He then picked up Kyla and left the apartment. Residents of a unit on the floor above Tania's heard screams. They later looked out of the doorway and saw a man carrying a young child. One of the witnesses heard the man say, "You can come and stay with Daddy tonight," and "Daddy is here." At 9 a.m, all police from the Gold Coast and Coomera districts were alerted and were told to remain on the lookout for Paul Rogers' silver Holden Viva wagon. At 10:39 a.m, a mobile phone triangulation had been conducted, and it showed that Paul and presumably Kyla were in the Kyogle and Casino areas, towns south of the Queensland border. The mobile phone had not moved for hours. At 5 p.m, a school bus driver returning home saw a silver station wagon parked in bushland just to the south of the roadway, about 15 kilometres west of Casino. At the time he thought nothing of it, but when he saw the case on the news, he immediately contacted police. The vehicle was in the exact same location at 9 p.m. Shining a torch into the vehicle, the New South Wales Police Inspector saw Paul Rogers lying in a reclined position in the driver's seat, with a large amount of gaffer tape wrapped around the lower part of his head. The inspector then saw Kyla lying on the right-hand side of her father's chest and torso. The doors were locked, and acts had to be used in order to gain entry. It was clear that Paul and Kyla Rogers were deceased. A washing machine hose was found on the ground next to the car. At some stage, exhaust gas had been fed into the passenger compartment of the car using the hose. While Paul and Kyla had been affected by carbon monoxide, it did not build up to fatal levels. Investigators concluded that perhaps fearing discovery, Paul Rogers removed the hose from the vehicle before it had a fatal effect. He then asphyxiated Kyla, who may have already been unconscious, by holding her forcefully against his chest. He then wrapped the gaffer tape tightly around his mouth and nose, causing him to suffocate. It is believed that Paul and Kyla Rogers were already dead before the bodies of Antony and Tania Simpson were discovered.